Hey everyone, it's hashtag Malkin Live. You know, I've been doing these live stream shows now every day on Periscope and YouTube for, I think this is week 3, actually. There's so much happening in the news. So I thought it would be so perfect to have Zack Vorheis come on. He's the famous Google whistleblower, and he's been riffing off all of Trump's tweets from this morning, raging about social media censorship. Let me bring him in right now. Hey, Zack.
Hey, Michelle. How you doing?
Good, good. You're holding up okay in these pandemic times?
Yeah, I'm in this really wonderful place in Costa Rica. Thought I'd be back in the States, but borders are kind of closed and tickets now are really expensive. So I'm here for a little bit longer, I think.
It's a good place to quarantine. I'm jealous. I trade places with you any day.
That's what everybody else is saying. So maybe they're right.
Yeah. So I wanted to start off with a tweet that you posted this morning at around 9:30. Dear real Donald Trump, these social media companies are aligned against you. They have stated their intention to use AI censorship against you and your followers. They think your voting base are low information voters, quote unquote, which necessitates their meddling over in the election. We're trying to get this message out to Donald Trump. You have so much knowledge about this. Go.
Yeah. So, I'm known as a Google whistleblower. In June, I did a disclosure through Project Veritas explaining that Google's censorship regime was, targeting conservatives. They released a video showing Jen Janai, one of the AI directors, saying that only a company the size of Google could stop the next Trump situation in 2020. And that was a bombshell. Everybody was talking about it for, the 3 days that it was released, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But nobody knew who I was because I was under a cloak of anonymity. So I came out a few months later in August, after Google decided that they were going to come after me. And then I was like, my name is Zack, and here's 950 pages of Google's censorship regime system for the whole world to look at. And so everybody was able to see how Google was actually doing their censorship and the project that they had that was doing this censorship, which was called Machine Learning Fairness. And so I've disclosed this to Google, to the internet through my website, zackvorheis.com. I'm trying to get the word out because I've been warning, people for almost a year now that Google's going to meddle in the United States election in 2020. They meddled in the 2016 election. They've acknowledged that they've done this under the guise of, making the internet safer for our users and preventing the spread of misinformation. And as I've disclosed through my documents, it's not that they're trying to filter misinformation. They're trying to filter true information that is damaging to them and their narrative. And, now we're seeing the extreme version of this. And these next few months, as we go into the election in 2020, we're going to see that social media is going to ramp up. And, this is something I've been warning about. And, we've got to stop this because, between a mixture of the mail-in ballots, which is one of the biggest vectors of attack on our election system, and also the control of information and what gets out. This is how they're going to, use this multi-touch sort of way to try to, get Trump out of office and reverse this whole anti-globalism trend that's been going on, not just in the United States, but, the rest of the world, Brazil and the UK. And in fact, I want to talk about Brazil for a second. The Supreme Court of Brazil found that Google had illegally meddled in the election in that country. And what they were doing is that they were suppressing information related to now President Bolsonaro, positive information about him, and then raising negative information up. And the reason why they were doing this is because they were paid by Bolsonaro's opponent. In Ireland, they meddled in the election related to a constitutional reform, which overturned the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution of Ireland. And this was related to the right to life and the abortion. And in fact, as I've disclosed through Google's blacklists, they actually literally blacklisted the term the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution of Ireland.
Yes, right.
And this was something that they said that they weren't doing, that they weren't censoring anything. In fact, the CEO, Sundar Pichai, said that, Google doesn't censor at all based on politics and that they had no blacklist. And I'm sitting there like, as a Google employee, I was like, we don't have a blacklist, really? And so I did a search internally, and I was able to find their blacklist. And in fact, they literally named it blacklist on their internal servers. And so I took this document, and a bunch of others, and this was part of my disclosure to the public. You can see all of that at zackvorheis.com/blacklist.html. And you can see all the other stuff. There's like 40 pages of blacklist terms that were used in their YouTube re-ranking algorithm, which was called BitTwiddler.
Yes.
And
I think I'm on that. I'm on that list.
You're not on the BitTwiddler list. You're in one of the other lists, I believe.
Right. Right.
Like Google Now or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I've been working at Google for 8.5 years. I've never seen anything like this. And what people have to understand is that Google was a really neutral company. It was almost like libertarian, I would stake it, right? Like, hey, let's just let all the search results be organic and trust the users and allow them to express themselves in the way that they see fit. And that was their motto all the way up until 2016. And then as soon as Donald Trump won the election, everything changed. And I really didn't care that much about, that election. I was sort of like apolitical and apathetic. And I was like, oh, they're both corrupt and I'm not going to participate. And I say that honestly, because that's how I thought. And then once Trump won, I was like, wow, I can't believe that he won. And I thought it was really, kind of hilarious. I was like, well, this is going to poke kind of the finger in the eye of the deep state. But now they're going to have to work with them. Well, it turns out that Google was the most depressing place to return to in that morning. It turns out that everyone thought that it was the end of the world, except for a few slick people that didn't. And I was sort of taken back and surprised. I was like, why is everyone so upset? That we have a process. That process decided that Donald Trump was the candidate that won, and now let's get on with our day and just go and figure out what that means for us in the company. But that wasn't the way that the employees saw it. And a week later, there was an all hands meeting, which we called TGIF. And this TGIF, which was eventually leaked, was so eye-opening. I was like, wow, this is what the CEO and the C-level executives really believe. And they said a lot of things that were really inappropriate.
Yes.
For example, Sergey Brin said that he was personally offended at the election of Donald Trump.
Yes.
Our CFO broke down into tears.
Tears. Yes, that's right.
And she was recounting the night that that Trump won, and how she was speaking with the New York office and saying how I think we're going to lose this election. And I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute, how we're going to lose? Like, it's not our election. It's not Google's election. It's the election of the American people. And so, but what really caught my surprise, and this was actually something that I posted today in response to what Donald Trump was saying about Twitter censorship, was how the CEO was questioned by one of the Google employees about what we're going to do about all this information that's flowing around that all the low information, voters are accessing, and what we can do. And the CEO answered that one of the successful things that Google had engaged in was censorship of fake news, and how they were going to be using their AI censorship tools and wrapping that up and developing that further. And I went, well, wait a minute, we're censoring fake news? Like, I didn't know that. And this is what I said back in 2016. So as someone that likes to research and sort of get into it, I started like researching into what Google was actually doing with regards to censorship. And so I started digging in, and I found out that there was like all of these documents related to fake news. And so I started like looking in these design documents, and one of the things that they described as fake news was the concept that Hillary Clinton was running weapons through Benghazi in order to arm ISIS terrorists. Now, being kind of apolitical at that point, I was like, man, I've heard a lot about this, like this whole email scandal. I'm like, maybe now's a good time to actually dig in and see what's really going on. And so I dug in and decided to become an expert on this. And I went, wow, there's actually a lot of information that this might actually be true. And as I started to dig in more, I started to realize, oh man, this looks like it actually is true. And so when I came back to the fake news design document, I went, wait a minute, is Google really trying to filter the fake news? Are they trying to shill for Hillary Clinton? And I started to suspect that it was the latter, that they were actually covering for Clinton, and that they were trying to stop the propagation of that information because it was damaging to, to Clinton. And so as I started to dig in, I was like, well, wait a minute, if there's this, fake news classification, then there must be some mechanism of which to carry out the censorship. So what's that? So I dug in and I found it. And this system was called machine learning fairness. And as soon as I heard that, machine learning fairness, I was like, oh, this is the kind of name that an SJW would give to a censorship regime that would, lock down the whole internet.
Right. Sure. Disguise it as equity. Disguise it as social equity. Right.
Right. Exactly. And social justice. Because if they don't do this, then and they were calling it like algorithmic unfairness. That was the problem. All this algorithmic unfairness. But the problem was, as I was reading through this design document, I was alarmed by some of the suppositions that they were posing. So there was like this Q&A like section, and there was this question: can objective reality be considered unfair? And the answer to that, surprisingly, was yes. And the example that they give was, let's suppose that someone is searching for CEO on Google image search.
Sure.
And let's assume that Google search returned a bunch of images showing that the majority of the CEOs were male. Now, even if that search result reflected actual reality, that could still be classified as algorithmically unfair because it's reinforcing gender stereotypes, and therefore justifies intervention. Wait a minute. So if something can be, considered like objectively true, it can still be considered algorithmically unfair, and we have the right to intervene. That's what Google was saying in this design document. And I went, oh my God. And so I was like, I have to like bounce this off a few people.
Yeah.
And so there was somebody that was prominent. I'm not going to name the name, but and I bounced this off, and he's just like, oh my God, this is horrible. I can't believe that Google is doing such a thing. And so I was like, okay. And then I bounced it off a couple of other people, and they were like, no, there's no way that this is happening. You're making it up. And so I said, okay, I got to start downloading this stuff because people can't believe that this is actually going on. And also for my sanity, because, what Google is saying is pretty much out there. And in 2017, it was really shocking if I went up and said, hey, Google's going to lock down the whole entire internet. Yeah. Now, we all know at this point that that's, not a shocking proposition. It's kind of just taken for granted. But back in 2017, it was pretty out there. And so I just started like downloading all this stuff and kind of seeing the company evolve from something that was dipping its toes into censorship and kind of being like, should we do this, to being like, oh yeah, this is a great idea, and now let's like expand this like machine learning fairness algorithm into like all of our products. I'm talking Google Search, Google News, YouTube, all of their different search corpuses, you know,
Images.
Everything, images, and it was all going to be according to this machine learning fairness thing. And the reason why they were doing it were made pretty clear, right? There was this 4-step process of which they were applying to program people. And those aren't my words. Those are the words that were used by Google. And it was not just in one like slide, it was actually in a bunch of them. And so what they said, and I'm reading this actually from the slide right now, and what they said was, so step 1, training data are collected and classified. Step 2, algorithms are programmed. Step 3, media are filtered, ranked, aggregated, or generated. And step 4, people like us are programmed.
Right.
And so they said this is like a generalized filter bubble. And so by being able to like intervene in these 4 steps, then what they can do is they can program us as a collective towards a position that they want us to go that aligns with Google's corporate values.
Yes.
And so, you know, that's really out there for most people to grasp in 2017. And so let's fast forward to June of 2017, when Trump makes a trip to Saudi Arabia, comes home, tweets out the following: despite all the negative constant press, kafefe. What happened as a result of that word kafefe and the challenge that he gave to his Twitter followers to figure out what the definition, caused the New York Times to write a debunking article that got Google to delete one of its words out of its Arabic translation dictionary in order to make that Trump tweet sound crazy. So, you know, May 31st, 2017, Trump made that, you know, kafefe challenge. What happened was that people were able to figure out that Google Translate itself would translate that word from kafefe to "we will stand up." So if you took that word "we will stand up" and you translated that from the tweet, you realized that what Trump was saying in its fully decoded form was, despite all the negative constant press, we will stand up. He's talking to the deep state, you know, or you know, could be considered to be talking to the deep state under that interpretation. And so why the New York Times decided to debunk this thing is beyond me. And why, you know, YouTube's response to this internally on the same day that this New York Times article would come out would be to create a design doc saying, whoa, we've got it wrong. Kafefe is actually nonsense. So the fact that we're actually translating this word must obviously be an error.
Right.
And so they went forward and they literally deleted this word out of the Arabic translation dictionary. And the team that decided that they were going to do the censorship was called the Derrida team. Now, this is really interesting because I don't know if you know the philosopher Jacques Derrida.
I am an English major, and I was in college in the late 80s and 1990s. So the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they named their censorship team after the father of postmodernism.
Yes. And deconstructionism. Yes.
Yep. The destruction of Western civilization through the manipulation of language. You know, what a coincidence. And, you know, maybe these people know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So they censored this word. And then on June 7th, the Washington Post is advocating for the removal of Donald Trump by invoking the 25th Amendment to remove the president. Why? Because he's mentally incapacitated. How do we know? Because he's tweeting nonsense.
Yeah.
Well, the only reason why he's tweeting nonsense is because, you know, the New York Times is working together with Google in this weird way in order to delete words out of the translation dictionary.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of sounds like sedition, and if they're willing to do this to the president of the United States, what's going to stop them from doing that to every single one of you, including you, Michelle?
Yeah.
And so seeing this, I realized that I could no longer stay silent, because now that I knew about it, and now that I realized that this was seditious, if I didn't say anything, then I'm now wrapped up in this conspiracy of sedition through silence. And so that's when I started grabbing all of this documents and started going towards, disclosure. And I had to find a media organization that could, do this justice. And so I was told, don't go to the New York Times, don't go to the Washington Post. They're just going to sell you out. That's obvious. And then it was actually some of the people on Breitbart, which were like, you know what? You should talk to Project Veritas. They're the most qualified to deal with this. And James O'Keefe is a person of the utmost, highest integrity.
He absolutely
and so
is. Yeah.
He is. He's just an amazing individual. And so I got a hold of them. They actually sent one of their agents to connect with me in San Francisco. And we ended up becoming really great friends. And he loved San Francisco so much that he ended up staying there, and he's still there to this day. And so we became really great friends. He's this amazing individual, and he knew exactly what was going on, and his head and his heart were aligned in the same place. And because of his friendship and because of his trust in James O'Keefe, that gave me the confidence that I could release this to James and not worry that he was going to sell me out, or he was just going to disclose all these documents to the general public.
Yeah.
Because at this point, I was still thinking that I could work for Google and just leak out this information, and that they would do their own sting operation, and then release some sort of undercover thing, because they weren't really doing whistleblowing back then. They were more just doing sting operations. So I was like, maybe Project Veritas can do the sting operation, and then I can just, feed them information and human intelligence on who to go after. And so at some point I was like, you know what? I trust you guys so much. You're not going to release this information. Here you go. Here's all 950 pages. And then things just sort of like after they got the information, they kind of sat on it for a while. And some stuff happened in the background that I guess it was some sort of disruption that happened. The deep state tried to take out Project Veritas. That is a story that most people don't know about. And so they kind of lost track of the story. And it wasn't until we had several waves of demonetization that happened in 2019.
That's right.
That Project Veritas then looked back at the things that I had given them and realized that this was something that they were going to make a priority again. They sent some undercover, operatives, and they actually got Jenj and I into a restaurant talking about how only something the size of Google could prevent the next Trump situation in 2020. And they just nailed it, right? It was them in their own words saying what they wouldn't say to the public, but what they were really, would say to you if they thought that you were one of them.
Right.
So this was great.
Right.
And so I didn't know that they had this information. I had reached out to them a couple of times, but they hadn't really responded. And so I, as a Google employee, actually, not just Google, YouTube, working on their embedded app for TV and game consoles. After seeing all of this demonetization and all this censorship, go through, I realized I could not deal with this anymore. I could no longer be an employee working in the belly of the beast, participating in the system. And so I decided that, regardless of whether Project Veritas was going to move on this or not, I decided that I was going to resign. And as fate would have it, I was writing my resignation letter when I got a call from Joe Halderman, one of the executive producers of Project Veritas, saying, "Hey, Zack, can you read this transcript that we got on one of your, executives of Google?" And I went, "Yeah, send it to me." And so I read this and I went, "Yes, this is exactly what I was telling you guys. This is amazing." So it was Jen and I. So I went into this tirade, which I sometimes do, in this rant about like how Google was really doing this. They said, "Zack, this is amazing. Can you come to New York and say this on camera?" And I said, "What a coincidence. I'm actually doing my resignation letter right now." I got off the phone. I wrote my first and perhaps best resignation letter I'll ever write in my life. I was so happy that I was ending things on this in the way that they were. I felt that there was almost like an angel on my shoulder that, because it's like when you leave a company like Google, which is this amazing income and has all these benefits, you pretty much have to just basically like put your hands in God and basically say, like, I'm going to trust that this is the right decision and that what waits ahead is going to be more spectacular than what I'm going to leave behind. And so, like, I literally just had a feeling that this was the right thing to do. And so to have this thing happen coincidentally, this offer to come to New York and disclose and clear my conscience of all the experience that I had gone through over the last 3 years was something beyond this world. And so I tendered my resignation, and immediately Google put me under investigation, like the same day. And I got a message from their internal network investigation team, and they were like, "Hey, we want to understand why you were looking at these certain documents, and HR would like to have a meeting with you. Can we hold one right now?" And I said, "Nope, like, I'm resigning and I don't want to participate in any sort of investigation." So they're like, "You're cut off," right? They ended my employment right there on the spot, cut off access from the building, which was actually probably a pretty smart thing in their, in their thing, because they knew at this point that I had seen some things that were probably flagged as not good. But too late for them. I was heading to New York the next day, which I did. I went there. I got it all on video under the cloak of anonymity. And we only released 2 pages with that disclosure during the interview. And this was in June of 2019. And I had this debate about whether I should release the whole thing, so I prayed about it, but I got this feeling back that I should hold off because it might be too vengeful and it seemed like the wrong timing to disclose all of this information at the time. And so I waited. And then it was Google that decided that they were going to conduct a form of legalized like lawfare against me, through the legal system. And this was something that they had done successfully to Kevin Cernecki.
Yes.
And they were able to drain like over $100,000 out of him. They made up this phony charge that he was doing corporate espionage by trying to find out whether Google was targeting conservatives at the company, which they were. And he had amassed a document pile of like 2,000 pages. I guess, us Google employees are pretty thorough when it comes to documentation, as you probably well know.
Yeah.
And so he had amassed all these documents. And so Google went after him on a criminal charge and through the civil system. And so they really were trying to, take him out. And so they were beginning, this phase with myself. I realized that I wasn't going to be able to win in the court of public law, but I could win in the court of public opinion. And so I decided that now was the sign that I needed to take all the documents and disclose it to the public. And so I printed all 950 pages out, and then I took it and I put it in a box and I mailed it to the Department of Justice Antitrust Division in Washington, D.C. And I wrote them back a letter saying, "Yeah, I've given all the documents from Google to, first off, I have them, and two, I've given them to the DOJ. And so I sent that off to them as a response. And shortly thereafter, I started getting anonymous attacks on Twitter by people that were kind of like dead naming me, for lack of a better term. Like they were like calling me out. They're like, hey, shouldn't you change your name, from gainfully employed tech geek, Mr. Whistleblower? Mm-hmm. And so we set a trap. We gave them a link, as some of my friends started to engage in a debate with them. They gave them a link. They clicked the link, and then that link was an image that was hosted on one of our servers. And so, boom, we got the connection info. We figured out what the IP was. And the IP, we reverse mapped it back to Google, Indiana. And so we went, aha, these anonymous trolls are working for Google. And so I realized that because of what they were doing with that, and because of the legal letter that I had gotten, that Google was out for blood. So I decided that now would be a good opportunity to throw up a Deadman switch. I called up James O'Keefe and I said, hey, James, in the event of my untimely death, all the documents that I've given you can be entered into the public space, full public disclosure on everything. And then I went to Twitter and I put up the same thing, the same day, and had this picture of this dragon that had ensnarled a person with its tail. And then it's like the last move, he was like stabbing it through the heart. A little bit violent, but I wanted to get them to get the point across that I had enough to like do a tremendous amount of harm, metaphorically speaking. And so they responded by sending police to my house. The police saw something at my gate, which was a canister of denatured alcohol that my very attractive roommate uses to spin fire at her events. And so they're like, oh, this can be technically considered an incendiary device. So we're going to call in a bomb threat. So they called in the bomb squad. They closed down the streets from 20th of Valencia all the way to 22nd of Valencia. They shut down the theater. They shut down the convenience stores. They shut down the Whole Foods right on my block. They shut down all of it and evacuated everyone. And I didn't realize that it had gotten to this extent. I just thought that there were police like outside of my door. It wasn't until one of my friends had come to my house and realized there's a lot of police at Zack's place. And then they gave me a call and they're like, yo, what's going on here? And so it turned into kind of a police standoff because I didn't want to come out, but they let me know that they were going to do shifts until I came out and answered a bunch of pretty much innocuous questions, like whether I had intentions to harm myself or anyone else. So finally, I realized that they're not going to go away. I might as well come outside. So if there's any funny business, it'll be done under the cover of like 20 cell phones going rather than like whatever body cam footage the police would have if they came into the house to like ask me these questions, person to person. So I come out there, I answer their questions, and then and they asked me like, well, why would Google do this? And I say, well, they would do this because I'm a whistleblower and I've disclosed 950 pages of their censorship regime to the DOJ, showed them a picture on my cell phone of the image that I'd taken of the letter that I had sent to their law firm. And then the police were like, okay, you are what you say you are. You really are a whistleblower and we're sorry for all of this. And then they packed up and they pretty much de-escalated. I was on a plane the next day to Washington, D.C. We went to Sarah Carter. I met with her. We kind of pumped up the story. And then she did this huge release. And I'll always thank Sarah Carter because she was one of the major first people to really, pump the story up. Project Veritas had, its release. It went all throughout Twitter. And let me tell you, everyone from around the world came and downloaded that cache of documents that I had released. And now that cache of documents is up on my website. You can visit it at zackvorheis.com, along with the blacklist. And, what Google really thinks about, censorship and what needs to be blacklisted, and how they're organizing to, sculpt the information landscape.
Yeah.
And
so let me ask you this. For a lot of people who hadn't been following your story, it's clear that you put your life on the line, literally, to get the truth out there. Now, the truth that you discovered has been out there now for 3 years. And for the last 3 years of the Trump administration, the president has promised that he's going to do something about it. He did last year when he coined the infamous phrase that he was monitoring the situation. He did it a couple of weekends ago when he tweeted an excerpt of a speech that I had done last year here in Colorado, decrying the almost daily deplatforming of my friends, my allies, who work across a number of policy areas, whether it's immigration, life, vaccines, national security, and censorship, and nothing has been done. And so this latest spate of tweets, starting last night and then beginning all morning, is what prompted me to reach out to you, because you have produced this huge trove of documents, turned it over to the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department. Last week, the Attorney General, Bill Barr, made noises again that perhaps he and other state attorneys general are preparing for some sort of antitrust action. And yet we still have had no action. Isn't it too late? I mean, I hate to be black pill about it, Zack, but isn't it too late? The election is in how many months?
Yeah, it's like in November, and and time is running out. And I've been warning that, they're all going to lock down everything, prior to the election. And now we're starting to see that ramp up even more. Like, they're now adding, a news guard onto the president's tweets and
right,
trying to redirect everyone into the mainstream media version, fact check version of reality, which is, it's not fact check. It's their own narrative that they're fact checking against,
right,
which has been proven over and over again to be false.
And then you've got YouTube, right? This was just revealed yesterday as well, which is, running explicit interference for Chi-Com propaganda in the comments as well. So, I mean, what exactly can be done? We've got all of these senators. I've asked this of a number of people who have been targets of banning. And of course, we have the decision from the DC Circuit courts this morning dismissing Laura Loomer's one of her challenges. It's not the only one. There's multiple ones. But this one was the one that was carried with Freedom Watch, Larry Klayman, against Google, Facebook, Apple, and Twitter. It raised antitrust issues, totally dismissed. So any action that the Justice Department is going to undertake is too late, in advance of the election in 6 months. And then, as you said, this is all compounded by the mail-in ballot fraud that is inevitable. So are we looking at a Trump loss? Is that what's going to happen? Is that going to be the price of his inaction over the last 3 years?
I think there's certainly some challenges with Trump coming up. In the blue states, they're doing their mail-in ballot actions. I think that there's still a lot of really good states out there that acknowledge the rule of law and aren't taken in by this, pandemic that's raging right now. And so I think that, it's been said that we have to see the corruption and wake up to it. And one of the things that brings me hope right now is the number of people that are waking up right now to all the corruption that's happening in relation to this COVID-19. We had the Out of Shadows documentary. We had the Plandemic, 30-minute first part that was released. And these two movies were surprising in the amount of people that have no interest in politics whatsoever, for the first time waking up and saying, wow, maybe there's a lot of, there's mouse retroviruses and vaccines and other animal viruses in these vaccines. Or, is there a possibility that this COVID-19 pandemic is being, used by social engineers in order to advance their political agenda. You know, people are starting to see that something's not right.
Yeah.
And I think that we can't underestimate the power of what happens when people wake up. And, you know, for anyone that's been following Trump, like, you know, it looks like he'll lose up until, you know, the 11th hour. And then he like comes back in this amazing comeback. And then everything collapses before him. And like, it's almost surreal. It's almost like watching a movie.
Yeah.
Because I think that he's got a trump card. And there's a lot of signals that are confusing to me. And I can't really predict what's ever going to happen. I mean, do you feel that way as well? Like, you know, things just sort of come out of left field. And, you know, we've got like Barr saying that there's going to be some antitrust movement action happening in the summer now. And, you know, so I'm still hopeful. And I trust that there's a plan and that it's going to be revealed to us as the election draws closer.
I have to hold on to some sort of hope, Zach. You're right, and I think you make an excellent point about uncertainty. I think that those of us who learned from the 2016 election cycle are humbled by our inability to predict, to analyze, to forecast what exactly is going to happen. And the pandemic added this huge disruption to everything. And I would say, I think the most hopeful thing I feel about is not about immigration. It's not about, I think that's the main issue that got Donald Trump elected. But, you know, you mentioned pandemic, and, you know, I had Judy Mikovits on, I've had RFK Jr. and a panel of other advocates on this, many of whom have been squelched on social media. And despite that concerted effort to redefine any challenges to the public health industrial complex, the message has gotten out. I can't tell you how many family members of mine who have no interest in politics were sending me the link to Plandemic when I had endorsed the book months before. I'm like, why are you telling me this? But on the other hand, it is very culturally interesting that, as you said, Zach, that people who were not engaged before seem more woke, to borrow the leftist word. We need to come up with our own version of what woke is, maybe just enlightened. And the more they try and turn the screws and prevent people from accessing that information, the more people seek out the truth. So I guess it's a double-edged sword, because that's great, but our ability to communicate has been hampered more than I have ever experienced in the 25 plus years that I've been on both new media and old media.
I honestly think that we should appropriate the word woke, because I think that we're really like truly woke. And I feel that they're just diet woke. Okay?
That's right. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know you're staying, it looks like you're getting a lot of fresh air and sunshine out there. That's the best immunity.
Yeah, and it's hot. It's so hot. I might be a little sweaty, in fact.
That's okay. Well, we got to make our enemies sweat is what we have to do. Thank you so much, Zach, for your time. Everybody go to zackvorheis.com for more information, access the treasure trove of documents that you have, and you're on Twitter at Perpetual Maniac.
Yep.
All right. Take care.
Thank you, Michelle.
You bet.
All right.